Hey, what's up everyone? Mekkah here, and welcome to Bruh 3 House Takes Bingo. This is based on an idea by my fellow Fire Emblem masochist and friend Rengor. What he did was, he made this bingo chart and then he went to the front page of the Fire Emblem Three Houses subreddit to see how many people agreed with these takes, to see if he could get bingo. Now I found another way to milk this chart for content though, and I'm just gonna discuss these one by one and mark how much I agree or disagree. Now, here's the obligatory elitist disclaimer: play Fire Emblem however you want. There is no wrong way to play. The reason I'm discussing these is not to make fun of people who agree with these takes, but to discuss why some of them are bad takes. And while none of these can softlock you when playing Three Houses, especially on lower difficulty settings, like you're gonna be fine, I think that some of these are bad ideas worth discussing and debunking, so that there are less misconceptions in the Fire Emblem fanbase. I guess you could say that some of these ideas are Fire Emblem pitfalls, but not all of them. Some of these I even agree with to an extent. Now, I'm not going to get into all of these in this video probably, but if you enjoyed this vid, then show your appreciation down below, and if you're daring enough to drop the takes you agree with in the comments, then, you know, more power to you. So let's get into it. I'm going to color them based on how much I agree with them. I got my nice paint kit here. Anyway, the first one is Dodgetank von Aegir. So, Dodgetank von Aegir basically means you maximize Ferdinand von Aegir's avoid by stacking all kinds of possible avoid boosting skills and abilities and weapons and battalions and stuff. So you can make him a Wyvern, boost his flying rank that will get you alert stance plus, as well as the avoid plus 10 from the Wyvern class. You can give him sword avoid plus 20 from the Dancer class and then reclass him back to Wyvern. His personal skill gives him plus 15 to avoid when at full HP. Confidence, also plus 15 to hit, but in this case people use the avoid mostly. And in addition, you can do things like, of course, sword prowess 5 or some other kind of prowess if you're not going to sword route. And you give him a battalion that gives a bunch of avoid. And the idea is to make Ferdinand basically unhittable so that enemies have 0 hit on him. You can use him to bait enemies and kill an enemy phase. This is where the problem lies, because for all of these takes, actually, the context of when this is good is important. Like, if you're playing on hard mode or maddening mode, it's a completely different thing. I'm going to start with maddening because that's the route where I think differences between units are the most pronounced, and so it's the best way to gauge how good a strategy is. I'll get into hard mode a little bit later, but for now let's assume maddening mode, right? So you have your Ferdinand von Aegir, you put a bunch of investment into his flying rank, maybe sword rank. You basically gave up your Dancer just to make sure that Ferdinand could have sword avoid plus 20. And what do you have? Well, you have a unit that basically cannot be hit by enemy attacks. But what does he do on enemy phase when he baits an enemy? Because on player phase, he cannot attack. You have to wait in order to trigger alert stance plus. Maybe not always, maybe you're trying to attack with him, but then you lose some avoid. You might be able to get hit, and also you haven't invested into him as much offensively as you would have normally because you're getting all these dodge abilities. So he just kind of sits there, and on enemy phase, he hits someone back for maybe like a third or maybe a half of their health, depending on what weapon you have equipped. It's not very efficient. Now, some units can take advantage of high avoid, the best example being someone like Dimitri, who has Battalion Wrath, just murders someone. Petra can do the same thing. Dimitri also has, of course, Battalion Vantage, so you can stack that with Battalion Wrath and kill someone before they attack him. It's like the ultimate dodge ability. If you give Retribution to Dimitri, he's going to demolish everything on enemy phase before they even attack him. But Ferdinand has no way to get Wrath like that. The only way for him to get Wrath is the Warrior class, like mastering that, and then you need to get him below half HP, and then you can kill enemies maybe, but I've never seen anyone advocate for Wrath on Dodgetank von Aegir, and it's also like a pretty slow idea because mastering the Warrior class takes a long time. Certifying for Warrior is like another big rank burden because you gotta train axes and then qualify for Warrior. I think you need like B+ axes to qualify, a low % chance, or A axes to make the exam almost guaranteed. So that's tricky. So my point here is, it's a lot of investments, and you get out of it a unit that can sure bait enemies on enemy phase, but it's not gonna kill anything. And the funny thing is, no matter whether you're looking for something that's easy to set up and easy to use, like a good advice for new players, or something that's optimal for like efficient playthroughs, it falls flat both ways. And the other annoying thing is, there's a path for Ferdinand that's easily accessible and super powerful to use in any difficulty, and that's giving him A lances for Swift Strikes, just turning him to a player phase nuke. Swift Strikes, all you need to do is hit A lances, give him a strong lance. There's like 3 different lance relics you can use, and then it just 2-shots enemies, hopefully. And if he doesn't 2-shot, at least he does like a bunch of damage. You can like set it up with a mage or something. So the point is, you are turning a unit that would normally have really good player phase offense into a unit that has, well, he has good enemy phase durability, but no offense to speak of whatsoever. So no matter what you're doing in maddening, it's not going to help you very much. You can bait enemies, but then what? And then there's some additional struggles with it, like if he levels up HP, his max HP will exceed his current HP, and that will turn off his personal skill, so he loses 15 avoid, and then he might get hit. Gambits can also be annoying because Ferdinand, I think he has some charm, but he's not Dimitri, so there's like a better chance that he gets hit by enemies that have Gambits. That can also impede him, because when he gets hit by a Gambit, he loses battalion bonuses, he loses some portion of his stats, his personal goes off again. So it's flawed as well, even in the dodging department. So that's why I don't like this build. That's in the context of maddening. On hard, it's more viable in the way that everything is more viable, but I still think you're better off with other builds, because on hard mode you can probably make Ferdinand in such a way that he can one-round enemies despite everything and also survive despite of everything, so you don't really need to invest in dodge tank. When I discussed this with Rangor, I think what he said was like, yeah, the build works, but it's one of the most high effort ways to make a broken unit, whereas there's less effort ways that are more effective. In this case, it would be Swift Strikes, or just use a different unit with the dodge tanking build. Like I said, Petra I think does this much better because she has Battalion Wrath, so you don't have to get her damaged or master the warrior class to get Wrath from that way. You can just have a low health battalion and then you get 50% crit on enemy face, so it's pretty good. And in that way, there's like a lot more effective builds, both for offense and defense on player phase and enemy phase. So just use Swift Strikes, it's way better. And of course, I'm gonna just restate this right now. Does this mean you have to use Swift Strikes with Ferdinand? No, do whatever you like. If you want to find a dodge tank that's fun to use, I would recommend this one, but if you want to go with it, if you want to just use Ferdinand this way, nothing is stopping you to. It's fine. Like, don't worry too much. Do whatever you want. It can be fun. But I wouldn't recommend it from the perspective of like, is this a good idea? That's why I think this is a bad take. Dodgetank von Aegir. It is funny though, and it's just hilarious to imagine Ferdinand just bragging on enemies like, hey, you can't hit me. It's very in character, but I wouldn't recommend it as like gameplay advice. The next one is not really about a build, it's just about Ashe, and he is a good unit. People do say this every once in a while, they say Ashe is a good unit. I bet there's not a lot of people that agree with this, but they do exist. It's worth noting this is entirely separate from, is Ashe a good boy, or is Ashe a good character, or is he a nice guy, or should you use Ashe if you like him? These are not the questions we're answering today. The question we're answering is Ashe good? And I think it's different also from the question, is Ashe viable? Because every unit in Three Houses is viable to some extent. You can meme around even in maddening as long as you know enough about the game. In Ashe's case, it's actually not that hard to make him viable. The build for him is right there. Make him an archer and go into sniper and use Hunter's Volley. That makes almost every unit viable to some extent. But even within that sniper niche, or niche, I always forget how to pronounce this. Even within that segment, he doesn't stand out in any way. Ashe has no things that make him better as a sniper than anyone else. The only reason that snipers recommend it is he has a bow boot and there's nothing else that he really works as. The only class that comes close is Wyvern, like Wyvern Rider, Wyvern Lord. That is also a class that fixes almost everyone, but Ashe, I think, makes a better sniper than a Wyvern because he just doesn't stand out in any way as a Wyvern. He has some boons that let him get there faster, but getting to Wyvern is never really a big problem. And as a Wyvern, especially on maddening, he's not going to double anything, he's not going to kill anything. The reason people often bring up for Ashe as to why he's not good is his personal skill, which is another bit of a pitfall in its own. Like, a unit can be good regardless of how good their personal skill is. The personal skill can be a way to improve a unit that would otherwise not be as good. Bernetta is helped by her personal skill because, you know, +5 damage for basically free is really good. Annette is really helped by her personal skill because +4 strength when you rally someone is really, really good. But at the same time, is Raphael or Linhardt really much better than Ashe because of their personal skill? Not really, so you need to look at the whole picture. Ashe could have amazing stats everywhere and then still have the same personal skill, and he'd be really good. But he does not have those stats, so you gotta look at the whole picture. How much does the personal skill really hurt or help Ashe? In this case, we can just kind of ignore it because his personal skill is just block picking, which it saves you some gold, and that's about it. Like, sometimes I forget to bring a chest key when I have Ashe. That's how much it helps me sometimes. So the personal skill doesn't really impact it very much. It's more about the fact that his stats just don't stand out very much. He's just not very strong. And then there's nothing else that really compensates for that in a way of boons. Like, he can become a good sniper and he has like a good amount of boons to get into Wyvern, and that's really all there's to it. But as a sniper, you know, he's in Hunter's Volley, he can always be helpful somewhere. Even if he's not one-rounding, he's probably doing more than he would in any other class. So that still helps. But at the same time, there's other snipers that will do better. In fact, I would argue almost everyone that you would make a sniper can do something that Ashe cannot. Some examples would be Ignatz, who gets a huge hit bonus from his personal skill. There's funny things like Sniper Hanuman with a magical bow that can be kind of funny and different, and that's something that Ashe cannot really replicate, because as far as I know, Ashe's magic is also kind of trash. And I guess there's Claude, but he's not really a sniper. He's usually just more of his personal classes. Those are just what helps him out. I'm trying to think like other snipers. Like, I don't think Bernadetta makes a good sniper, but I'd rather make her other classes. But yeah, there's nothing that really makes Ashe stand out as a sniper besides the bow wound. Like, I think the only thing that Ashe gets that few other people do is Deadeye. But if you try to use Deadeye on Manding, your hit is going to tank so hard you're not going to hit with anything. So I don't think that really works out. So I'm going to give Ashe the good old red color as well. Ashe is not a good unit. Again, I mean, you should use him. Well, it's up to you. It's up to you. Whatever you want. Just do whatever you like. But he's not very good. Not relative to other units anyway. He's still viable. But viable is like if a unit can be used reasonably or not. Like someone like Sophia from V6 is not viable. You can make her work with a lot of training and a lot of favoritism if you wanted to. Some like arena abuse or RNG abuse or a bunch of stat boosters. But she's really not viable. Ashe is not that bad. But relative to other units, he's near the bottom. He's like, I think most tier lists will put him like next to Anna, and then there's some debate over whether he's worse or better than Anna. Like, that's how he ranks, basically. HBD is a good map. Interesting take. HBD means Hunting by Daybreak. It's the map that comes right after the time skip, where you get all your post-time skip students back, and you start out with just Byleth and your house sports. So Sedeth, Claude, Dimitri, not Edelgard. Edelgard doesn't have to go through HBD. Everyone else does. Again, this one is very dependent on which difficulty you're playing. If you're playing hard, I actually like HBD and I agree with it. If you're playing Maddening, it's a terrible map. So hard that it actually cancels out how good it was for me in hard. When I first played on hard mode, I actually really liked Hunting by Daybreak. I was playing Golden Deer and I actually really liked seeing all my students come back. I remember being particularly amazed by Leonie's post-time skip portrait, as well as some of the others. I'm not sure which ones I hadn't seen yet at that point. I know I already saw Claude because he was in the trailer. Everyone else was like not as interesting, but still pretty cool. Like I remember Ignatz, Raphael. I don't really like those time skip portraits as much. But generally, like, I like the vibe of Hunting by Daybreak just fine. There was a couple cutscenes that were kind of cool. But when I first played the map on Manding, I think that was with Blue Lions at some point. I was like, oh boy, this map is horrible. It's just, it can soft lock you, and I think the developers sort of knew that, but they were like, no one's stupid enough to play Manding on New Game Plus, right? Like, not on New Game Plus, right? He just played on New Game. Just played on New Game Plus, so you'll be fine, right? But they didn't think some people would play on New Game, apparently. They weren't prepared for that. And I think there's like an interview where they're like, yeah, you can get soft locked, haha, well, that's shit, it sucks, dude. That's rough, buddy. And so Hunting by Daybreak was born. Nowadays, there's a lot of ways to trivialize Hunting by Daybreak because people have broken their heads over it and figured out ways to make it better for you. You can use ways with like Pass and Stride and Impregnable Wall to skip most of the enemies and just fight the boss twice and win with certain setups. I made like a whole video about it, and I recommend you check that video out for some inspiration if you're stuck on this map. But just my first tip would be to just have a backup save for Chapter 12, so you can maybe prepare yourself a little bit better if you're unprepared. Because it's very easy to lose characters in Hunting by Daybreak. But I think that kind of design is so inexcusable that I do think Hunting by Daybreak is objectively a bad map in Maddening, to the point where it like cancels out how good it is in hard. I don't disagree with this as much as with the others. I think if you're just playing on like lower difficulties, you can think that Hunting by Daybreak is a good map and I wouldn't like argue with it. But generally, I don't think you can say Hunting by Daybreak is good because of Maddening. And Maddening, its existence makes Hunting by Daybreak so much worse, in my opinion. But you know what? That's his life. Next up is Wyvern is better than DK Annette, and DK here stands for Dark Knight, so the promoted master class that has tomes and horses and lances. That class that almost no one ever uses. It's actually like in here somewhere. It's like it's a bad class. Yeah, there you go. Dark Knight is not good in any unit. Specifically Annette. Now I've never seen anyone use Dark Knight Annette, so I have to talk about this quite a bit with Rengor, why it was on this bingo to begin with. Because Wyvern Annette is a pretty well-known build, a pretty well-liked build for people that just like doing things a little bit differently. Usually Annette is just a kind of a rally bot unit that just uses rally strength, speed, res, whatever else she gives. Move if you get her to S, I think. Kind of irrelevant though. It's mostly about the strength and everything. That's pretty good. But if you want to attack with Annette, there are some fun builds you can use. She has, I forgot what it's called. I think it's like a Bolt Axe combat art or something that hits on magic, or hits with magic on resistance. And combined with like the Crusher, for example, it can do an insane amount of damage and like one-shot enemies. And it's pretty fun. And the Wyvern uses it pretty well because it gets Axe Fire, so you like one-shot people with it. It's pretty neat. But the broad take is that it's better than Dark Knight, so why would Dark Knight be better? A couple reasons. For one, it puts it on the ground rather than in the air. Seems a bit odd because, you know, Wyverns are good. We're definitely going to get into that at some point. So why the hell would Dark Knight be better? Well, for one, if you're on the ground, you can use grounded battalions, and Annette is one of those few people that has an authority boon and a really good incentive to go to high authority levels, because there's a lot of good battalions that are higher ranks that other people wouldn't really use as much. The best example, in my opinion, is the Dance of the Goddess battalions, so the Blue Line Dancers and Opera Co-Volunteers to a lesser extent. That one's B rank, I think. So mostly about the Blue Line Dancers, they're like A rank and available right at the time skip. That battalion is so busted. Like, just invigorating 4 people right in front of you is so strong. And just having a quadruple dancer, even once per map, even though the battalion itself gives shitty bonuses, it's so powerful. And Wyvern doesn't have the option to use it, because that battalion is only available for grounded units, so not for flyers. In the same way, battalions are a bit of a problem for flyers, because there's a lot of battalions in general, but only a couple of them can fly. And if you're using a lot of Wyverns, which is potential, because, you know, Three Houses meta is a bit of flying spam, then competition might be fierce. And in addition, there's only one battalion that is like easily available that gives magic, I think. Most of them are physical based, so they will actually hurt her magic quite a bit at lower levels. So you preferably would have, I think there's like the ESSO Research Company or something, or like it's like a Strike battalion that gives magic, I think. It's like the only one you get, which is pretty silly. For the same reason, it's kind of hard to fit someone like, what's it called? There's like the Dark Flyer class is also kind of hard to use for that reason, because there's only one battalion that can really fit with them. Everything else is either grounded or it reduces your magic, which is not great. Also, something that Dark Knight can do that Wyvern cannot is use spells. It's a magical class, and Annette has a couple of like funny spells that you can use to just leverage her offense. It's nice to have one to range on your weapon for one, so you just snipe people from long range. She has a crest, so using the Thyrsus with her is a pretty good idea. It doesn't give her Pavise or Aegis like it does to Lecitia or Lawrence, but it's still really good for sniping from range. In general, you just don't want your magic units attacked anyway. So I think Dark Knight is just much better for a support Annette. It gives you Canto on a unit that gives rallies and everything, which is very helpful. And it just has more options for supports, which I like. I can see where Wyvern could be better, because obviously the mobility from Wyvern is still very useful. And if you're doing Wyvern Bolt Axe one-shotting memes, it could work. It's still worth noting that you can give the Crusher to Dark Knight Annette. You can still raise her axe rank. She has a boon in it just fine, and still use those options. I think she might be slightly less powerful with it, but only with like the difference between the Wyvern and the Dark Knight's Axe Fair, which probably gets negated a bit by the difference in base magic. I'm not going to look up the stats right now, but I bet the difference is very small. It's just the mobility, I think, that makes Wyvern potentially useful. I've never tried these, so I'm not going to give these a big disagree, because I just don't have the experience to. I think if Rangor says Dark Knight is better, I'm inclined to trust him, because Rangor has broken this game down completely, but I can't really discredit this one from my own experience. But I definitely think, depending on what exactly you're doing with Annette, I think Dark Knight could be better. So Wyvern being obviously better, I think I disagree with that. So I'm gonna go with yellow. Like, obviously I'm color coding these. Like, red is like hard disagree, orange is like kind of disagree, pretty disagree. Yellow is I don't know about this one. And then if it goes towards green at any point, then you know, I agree. But so far we have not agreed yet. Okay. Next meme, Warp is overrated. This one is on the thumbnail. This is a funny take, I think, because I see it every once in a while too, where the most common way I see it phrased is Warp is overrated in Three Houses because you have so many other mobility options. And that part is true. You do have other mobility options. You have Stride, you have Flame's Rescue, you have the Dance of the Goddess, you have a Dancer itself, you even have Smite if you want those. So why would you need Warp? Well, again, it depends on playstyle, depends on difficulty, but the thing is, these things stack. You can use multiple movement boosters if you want to, and they're all good. And if you're trying to one-turn maps, sometimes you need every bit of mobility you can get to the boss on the other side. Like, almost always, if you're trying to use mobility to your maximum advantage in a low turn count playthrough in Three Houses, you're trying to get across the map to kill the boss. And sometimes they're like really a lot of tiles away, or maybe there's a wall between you that is easier to cross with Warp. Because that's one thing that Warp can do that other mobility boosters sometimes cannot, is cross walls. Like, you can't really, if you get a flame across the map, like across that wall to rescue, you probably have gotten someone else there too, so that doesn't really matter very much. If you can't smite someone through a wall, you can't stride through a wall, you have to like move in an awkward way. If you think of like the Edelgard Palace, I forgot what it's called, Embar, in that map, like the actual indoor map, You have to go through a wall to get somewhere. So warp is very useful for that. Now you might say, what if I'm not playing efficiency? What if I'm just like playing normally? Then warp is still useful every time, or like sometimes. So first of all, it's just free XP. Like if the city has nothing better to do, or if Linhardt has nothing better to do, and it's just free XP. Getting XP is good. Like every player loves getting experience, getting those level up ding-ding-dings. Come on, that's good. Everyone can agree that's good. If you want someone across the map for another reason than skipping the map, that's also very helpful. Like I said, it goes across walls, it goes across terrain. Generally giving someone a bunch of extra movement for a turn is good. Like I think everyone agrees that stride is pretty good. And warp is like an individual stride on some levels. Like it's obviously different, but you can kind of see similarities between your utility, right? Sometimes you're having like Byleth on one side of the map and your audience are fighting the other, and suddenly you need Byleth on the other side because, oh shit, people are in trouble. We need someone to bail us out. So you have someone juggernaut like Byleth. You can warp him across and he'll be back with you in a moment. So you can just make sure that people are in the right place at the right time. And warp allows you to fix it while you've already moved people out. Especially with stride on the first turn, people tend to be kind of far apart, and warp is a way to bridge that gap after you've already strided. So I think even in casual play, warp has a lot of utility that people might not always realize is there. I used warp City on my first playthrough, and I found it very useful even when I was not skipping anything. Like I wasn't skipping jack shit on my first playthrough. I skipped one map for fun, just to see if I could. I skipped the exact map I just talked about, the end bar map. That's it. And other than that, I just used warp for utility, and I really thought it was pretty good. The range isn't super huge, it's like magic divided by 4, so it really takes a lot of magic to get great range. That's why Lysithea exists though. She has a lot of magic. You can still get like a 10 range warp by the end of the game. And Linhardt and Manuela can still use like their low range or warp to steal some effectiveness sometimes. Like just sometimes just 2 tiles is all you need. Like we'll get into that with Smite and everything. Like this, it's not bad, it's pretty good. So yeah, I think I hard disagree with this one. I think we're going with the good old red. This is a really broad take. Alright, next up, Gilbert is a terrible unit. This is something I thought when I was new to the game, and it only took me a long while to realize, hey, Gilbert is actually pretty good. So what's going on here? There was actually, at one point there was going to be a Gilbert waifu, but it was pretty hard to collect footage for him, and also really use it to his full extent, and it didn't end up being inspiring enough to turn into full project. But I was heavily considering him, because he's someone with a terrible first impression in a lot of different ways. Now, I gotta emphasize, just like with Ashe, this is not about Gilbert as a character or how he's written or his personality. This is purely about his gameplay utility. Like, we could talk about Gilbert being a bad dad all day, but this is about how his stats and his combat arts and his skills hold up in battle, right? Everyone thought he was bad, and I understand why, because he's not very impressive when he turns up in Hunting by Daybreak, and it's kind of hard to get him out of that first impression if you don't know how to do it. Now, Gilbert is in a funny class. He's like his own personal Fortress Knight class that reduces his speed to magnificent amounts. He's like 2 base speed or 3 base speed. And not just, like, that would be terrible in Chapter 1, and he has it in Chapter 13, which is so dog shit terrible. But actually, speed is not as big of a deal in this game as it is in other games. And second of all, he can raise his speed by enormous amounts just by certifying for a different class. Because once he gets out of that dumbass Fortress Knight class that he's in, he can get into something else that has much more base speed. And not only will his class base improve a lot, but his modifier from himself will also improve a lot that way. I forgot exactly how it works, but you can get Gilbert like, I don't know, 18 extra speed or something just from getting a different class on him. And I've tried it, I think, on maddening, and within 1 or 2 months of tutoring, like a little bit, I just got him into Wyvern Rider, which is super easy. And the same way you can get to Paladin, or if he's level 30, you can get into Great Knights, you can get him to basically any other class that has like an actual resistance speed base. And from there, I mean, he's still not like a speed demon or anything, and especially on maddening, he will still get double probably, but it will no longer be like freaking based off of Wallace in the final chapter, basically. And that's a pretty big improvement. So that takes away one of his first bad impressions. And then the other thing about Gilbert is that even though his speed is terrible, you can still stack defense with him to a point where he still doesn't take enough damage to care. He doesn't have a crest, so you can't use the Aegir shield for this, because that will just reduce his HP super fast with every attack, because the crest penalty, he gets like 10 damage every time he gets into combat, even if he doesn't even counterattack. So that'd be bad. But even with like a silver shield, you can do something funny. You can give Ashe a silver sword for the time skip, have him give it to Gilbert, and then Gilbert has like insane extra defense. And then combined with his personal skill and his high defense at base, you can actually tank enemies pretty well. despite the fact that he gets doubled by everything. If you have enough defense, then having low on speed doesn't really matter much. And then you can just leverage his offense with something like the Brave Axe Plus or some other kind of weapon, just two-shot enemies. Like, just take it slow if you want to. That's actually kind of like the kind of unit that I think a lot of casual players would enjoy, is a unit that just doesn't take much damage. Like, everyone loves using Oswin and Effie and Gatry to just tank enemies into oblivion. Even if your offense is bad, it doesn't matter very much. It's funny that Gilbert ended up having a bad reputation for that reason. And I guess a part of it is probably down to his personality, which is like a big part of units feel. But if you're just ranking units by usefulness, then this kind of stuff, I mean, it's probably relevant. It's not like super efficient, but if you're talking efficiency, then Gilbert has a whole slew of options that are pretty helpful to have. One of them is rally defense. He has that at base for free, so he just boosts someone else's defense by 4. If you combine him with Annette utility, and you probably do have Annette because, you know, you're playing Blue Lions, so you can give someone rally res, speed, strength, and then from Gilbert you can give him rally defense, and there's just an enemy phase monster. It's just an easy combo accessible to anyone playing through Blue Lions if they don't kill Annette off. And then what else can he do? He has Smite at base, which is just +2 squares. Smite is like a mini warp almost. It just moves someone 2 squares. Sometimes that's all you need. Like Shove is pretty nice in this game, but a little bit hard to get. Smite just comes for free. A lot of units just don't have an armor boon or a need to train in armor ranks, but Gilbert just has the armor rank for free to use Smite, and it's pretty damn helpful. Just for illustration, the Blue Lions low turn count playthrough, I think it only uses the Do as a Smite bot. Like, it just changes the Do's rank training to just Armor Knight for the first 4 chapters, and like hard grinds his tutoring on armor just so he can Smite in chapter 4. And that's like hardcore LTC. But the point is, Smite has great utility that you shouldn't overlook if you have the option to have it. There's a lot of places where Smite can be helpful, and Gilbert's not stuck in the Armor Knight class. If you make him a Paladin or a Wyvern, he can move like 8 or 9 tiles per turn, or even more with like dances and striding, and just smite someone further into combat if you want to. Like, or you can like smite people with support range, or smite them out of range, or anything like that. There's like a lot of applications to smites that you'll start to see when you play the game. If you've played the Tellius games, then you know how useful Shove and Smite can be in weird situations. Like, you can smite your Dancer closer to like a good figure or something. So Smite, also good utility. So there's a lot of different ways you can make Gilbert useful without his stats, and then his stats are also like pretty fine, honestly, for actually doing combat. So this is a broad take. We're gonna make this red. Gilbert is pretty good, especially because this is the last thing I want to add. Gilbert does not need to be trained in part 1. You don't have to spend tutoring on him in part 1 when it's in high demand. Early on, all your students want to get like all the ranks they can possibly get. Besides like what they personally want for their own classes and combat arts and goals, they generally just want axe rank for death blow. They want bow rank for hit plus 20. They want the good stuff, and then they also want like you might want to like spend your points on other things like what's it called, like getting professor rank and stuff. So the early part of the game is where tutoring and like professor points are in a high demand. When Gilbert joins, you're in the post time skip, and I don't know about you, but I'm always bored as fucking in Monastery in the time skip. So there's all the time in the world to pay attention to Gilbert and make sure that his stats and ranks are getting to where you need them to be on a short term. So it's pretty easy to make Gilbert into a Wyvern Lord without losing anything on your other units, because they've probably already hit their goals, or they're gonna by the time they hit level 30. Like, doesn't matter what difficulty you're playing this on, this can always work for you. Tutoring in part 2 is way less in demand than tutoring in part 1, and Gilbert also just joins at a high level to the point where he can qualify for all the promoted classes. Like, I'm pretty sure he joins like at the highest level in the game. Besides maybe Yuritsa if you recruit him late, or maybe Anna if you recruit him late. But generally, Gilbert is just, he's just there. He doesn't take XP from part 1 either. He's just free. He's just good, and you should like that. Okay, I decided I'm gonna do like 1.5 row this video, so I'm gonna do these last 2, I think. So axes are bad overall. This is an interesting one that I had to talk about with Rengor a little bit, because it's really a very meta-defining question. Three Houses does not have the weapon triangle per se, so generally a unit just uses the weapon type that you're comfortable with, that you're putting them in for almost all the game, unless they're facing like an enemy with the breaker skill. Generally, just whatever weapon works for you, works for you. So why does the overall ranking of a weapon matter if most units are just focused on one? It kind of depends on your perspective. I will say there are situations where swords are useful and good, even if you haven't even trained it that much. Sometimes you just want to use a sword. But overall, I think axes are one of the best weapon types, if not the best weapon type in the game. And we're probably going to get more into this with the Wo Dao Plus take right here. But the thing with the axes are bad at overall, it probably stems from the fact that their weight is super high, and then their hit is also like lower. That's generally the whole idea with swords versus axes, is that swords are higher hits and they keep you faster because their weight is lower. Axes are stronger, and then they have worse hit and then more weight and everything. I can see where it comes from, where you would like swords better. And early on, especially if you don't want to get doubled, you probably don't want to be caught holding an axe. If you're like, I don't know, even if you're Raphael or something, you probably get doubled regardless of what you use. But if you're like Dimitri, you probably don't want to be holding an axe early on, right? That's fair. That's fair. In that case, axes are bad. But as you grow more and more, axes become more and more good, and their flaws become less and less pronounced because there's more ways to negate their weight. Of course, you gain strength, but you also have the option to get weight -3 or even weight -5. Edelgard makes good use of weight -3 to actually just double with axes very early on. Then on top of that, the higher might tends to be better. Like if you're not doubling regardless, which is often the case in maddening, then it doesn't really matter how heavy your weapon is. You'd rather just have the higher might of axes, so that is also very helpful. And then on top of that, the differences between the hit rates between axes and swords are not so big that you really care about them, and as a result, axes tend to win out. Like I believe the difference between a silver sword and a silver axe, for example, is like 10 hit or something. I forgot if this is fortune variant or not, but the point is the hit gap is very small. So the disadvantage that axes have in that regard is just almost like completely irrelevant. And then Axe Fair is also on a really good class, Wyvern Rider, Wyvern Lord. Like we're getting into that at some point, but you gotta admit that class is really good. And to contrast that, Sword Fair is on like what, Assassin, Swordmaster, like those classes are not very good. So generally, if you're in a good class, axes are going to do more damage than swords. So you probably want to be using an axe in those cases. Just having 3+5 damage is pretty good. On top of the might advantage that axes already enjoy. There's some really good axes out there too. You got the Mace, you got the Brave Axe Plus, you got the Aegir, of course, which is easily the best weapon in the game. Raging Storm is a broken-ass combat art, and just moving again every turn is good. I don't know if you really want to count that towards axes or just towards Edelgard, but that's another factor, I think, why axes are so good. So, yeah, axes are really good, so you should use them. Not always. Like, there's units that don't want to use axes, obviously, but generally, I think if you're going to make like a competition of like which weapons are the best, I think axes win out. You might wonder, why not lances? Swift Strikes is really good, right? You get a lot of lance relics. I feel like lances, and this is something that I discussed with Rengor as well, lances are generally just good if a unit has a good combat art, but besides that, you generally just don't want to use lances all that much because they're kind of not that good. Like, think of it like this: besides Sylvain and Ferdinand and Sedeth, who has Swift Strikes, what unit really wants to use lances? Like, sometimes Dimitri does, sure, but I think Dimitri is still better off with either axes or swords, depending on what you make of him. So, yeah, I think even for units that would normally specialize in lances, they just don't want to use lances all that much. So, yeah, there's that. Finally, routes every part 2 map. This is a take that is... It really depends on how you read it, how charitable your reading of it is. If the opinion is meant to be, you should route every part 2 map, then this is a hard disagree for me, because that's tedious as fuck and generally unnecessary. You don't need the XP to get through the game. In fact, we all know you can beat this game with 0% growth, although you probably want to get some training in part 1 to qualify for the higher rank classes. But generally, you don't need to route every part 2 map. I get that a lot of people play the game that way because they want to maximize their XP gains, or just it feels kind of weird to just beat the map by beating one boss, which is often something you can do in part 2. So I get it, why you would play the game that way. It can be fun. I've tried it too. I didn't really enjoy it as much as I hoped I would, but I know Rengor said that he played Crimson Flower routing every map and he actually enjoyed it, so it's possible. So in that sense, I agree that it can be fun, but it's not the way you should play if you want to... I don't know how to put it. I wouldn't recommend adopting this as your default playstyle unless you find yourself enjoying it, basically. But I can't disagree with this because, like, it's not you should route every part 2 map, it's just route every part 2, which is like, that's how you want to play the game, then go ahead, play the game that way. So I'm going to give this one a nice yellow and read it in a charitable way, be like, okay, I route every part 2 map, do you disagree with what? Like, no, I don't disagree with the fact that you route every part 2 map. Like, have fun, do it your way, that's fine. Do whatever you like. Okay, that's 1.5 row done, a little bit more than that, so that means that I should be able to finish this in at least 2 parts. If you guys enjoyed, of course, if this video gets like 2 views total, then of course I'll continue with this because, I gotta satisfy my audience. But if you did enjoy it, then, feel free to drop a like and drop your hot takes in the comments, or, tell me which one of these you really disagree or agree with, especially if you agree with them, because that has me really curious. See if people actually like these options or not. Some of these I know are really funny to talk about, and I look forward to doing that in the next episode. So I'll see you guys around. Peace and goodbye.